Picking up from the last point here, we're now going to do a frame in focus. Set up to 1 second and click on the frame in focus button, and we can now try to see, well, just how good was our go-to here. What we're seeing here is the object in question, M42, and we can now just hit the buttons on our mount and move it around to compose it as we like, trying to get a nice sort of view here. We may want to put it dead center, we may want to, in this case, maybe put it a little off into the bottom left, whatever it is to try to give us some nice composition that we actually like. This is the same frame and focus tool, of course, that we used before. On some objects, well, in 1 second you may not actually see the DSO itself, but hopefully you can see the stars around it, get some idea as to where you are in the composition. Often you can still pick out a very, very faint smudge. There's no reason why you have to use 1 second. It gives a nice sort of readout here as we're moving around. You can increase this as much as you want to any kind of exposure duration. Frame and focus is going to run in generally a binned mode on the camera. Tries to get the fastest, most sensitive mode on the camera to use. When you're done, you can click on board here. And then if you like, you can go back and check your fine focus. It's the same tool that we used before. Click on fine focus, click on a star, and we can see the profile of the star, the image of the star, various metrics, the maximum, the highest 3 average, to sharpness. Click on import here. Again, whenever you get these same sort of metrics that we had seen before. If you like, you can click on preview now. Preview is going to give you the full size image, exactly as how you would capture. We may need to zoom out here. Hit the minus button there to zoom out, and you can see there in fact is your DSO. Let's get the guiding up and going. I'm going to pull down a second. You should always use, say, between 1 and 3 seconds, somewhere in there as your actual guiding rate. You don't want to be chasing the scene, and you don't want your mount to have too much of a chance to go astray. We can actually even pick out Orion here. We also see a very, very bright star. If we click on that, the box stays orange. It says low SNR down there, star lost. This isn't a very good star, it's actually too bright. We could click on this one over here, and it'll get a lock on it. We could also click on a number of other stars. For example, this one here, it'll go green, and PhD says that it has a lock. So we could use any of these stars. I'm going to click on stop to tell it to leave the mode. And now I'm going to click on the advanced thing here. The one parameter you may want to change at some point is this calibration step size. The last setup I used was very, very wide, all of 200 millimeters in focal length. This one's a little bit longer, so I'm going to take this down to 1000. Once you set it for your guide scope, you never need to change it. So we've hit that. I'm now going to tell it to begin guiding, so it'll actually try to enter its calibration. See here it says West Calibration 1. We see the orange crosshairs saying DX and DY down in the status bar, and we see that the star is now moving. What PhD is doing is it's taking a second exposure, it's then moving the mount, and we're getting to read out exactly how far it's moved. So far it's moved 30 pixels, and we need to move a total of 51 before it's calibrated. It's going to keep doing that calibration step size. The only time that this parameter is ever used is here during calibration. In this case, sending a second long guide pulse, taking a second image, until we get this. Okay, we just shifted over. Now it's saying east calibration, 1, 2. All it's doing right now is unwinding that same number of steps it had before. In right ascension, there isn't any backlash to worry about. The motor's never reversed direction, and so we don't have to worry about it ending up in a different spot. We should see here it's going to come back and it's going to get right back on those original crosshairs, which was the lock position. Once it does this, it's going to shift on over to declination guiding, to declination calibration, if you actually have that selected as something as an option. Once it does, it says clearing deck backlash. We do actually shift directions on declination, so there's going to be some backlash here to take out. 3, 4, what we're doing is it's trying to see when is the star actually moving. Once it does pick up some motion here, probably in another time, there we go. Now it says North Calibration 1, it's detected that the star is starting to move, and now it's actually noticing that the star is coming down here. We get the same dx and dy, distance. We're now actually calibrating the declination here. Once it's done with the north, it'll then just unwind that same number. And one thing that you will see is that often the actual spot that it ends up with in declination is not the same exact thing as the original position. This is because of any backlash in your declination. Now that calibration step size is being applied here. If you have a very, very long focal length scope, you may want to turn that down a little bit. The goal is to get it from anywhere between, it could be 5 or 7 to 40 or 50 steps. Anywhere in there is just fine. PhD is going to give up thinking that it can't actually move the mount if it hits 60. And the longer more steps it has to go through, the longer you're sitting here in calibration. So feel free to increase that or decrease that. That's one of the few parameters that actually will vary from user to user. It won't affect guiding accuracy at all, at least as long as you don't try to have your calibration happen in 1 or 2 steps. Okay, it's just turned green. We're now guiding. Everything is good. You did probably notice, though, that those crosshairs jumped because it actually ended up in a slightly different spot. Again, because of the deck backlash. Let's come back over and let's actually see where we are. So let's hit frame and focus again. And there's our DSO. Let me actually now, we can see it right here. It's in a slightly different spot because of that declination backlash. We can zoom in a little bit here to 100% view, 100% binned. And we can see there's our DSO. Well, that may not be the exact place we want it to be. So let's click abort here. Let's go back over to PhD. We can now tell PhD to stop. We can come back over here to nebulosity, hit frame and focus again, and now actually try to move the mount to get it so that we're composed exactly the way we want it. We'll move it around here and get to some spot that we like, and as soon as we decide that we actually like it, we'll click on abort. Okay, let's hit loop here. Let's find our guide star again. We can pick any fine one. We'll pick the same one we used in calibration. And we could hit stop here. Now take a look. This PhD button right now is grayed out. While looping right here, see this? It's grayed out. You can't actually hit it. While looping, you can't enter guiding. You have to hit the stop button in between and then click on guide. We'll see now, we should get the crosshairs to come up. It says that it's guiding. One thing to note if you have declination guiding going is that it will take some amount of time for declination guiding to settle in, as PhD tries to automatically detect exactly which way the drift is actually going. But right now we're guiding. It's at least good enough to be able to say that we can come back on over here and actually start taking a look at what we're going to get. So we had been set up for 1 second. We can shift this to something a little bit longer here. Let's shift it, say, to 30 seconds and hit preview. Preview is just going to pull up a single shot in the same exact way as you would actually be capturing. Back to the full resolution. If you've set binning manually here, it of course will do that, but it's exactly how you're going to be capturing the shot. Now it says down here, exposing 50%. It says it's a preview acquisition, tells you how long the exposure is going to be, and as soon as it's done here, we're going to see the image up on the screen. It's of course always good to preview the image before you decide to take a whole big long series. It says exposure done, it's downloading the image from the camera, and here we go, we now get to actually see the image. What we're doing now is we can zoom out so we can get a nice view of the whole thing. See, is this the composition that I want? We can see Orion, we can see its neighbor. We can now decide, okay, do we want to do something at 30 seconds? Do we want to do something longer, shorter? We can do things like check our fine focus here. Right now I'm thinking, well, maybe in fact it's a little bit soft. Let's take the fine focus. Let's look on the star again. And we can go in again and do the same routine that we did before to adjust the focus. Now, the softness I was seeing in the image may very well be because this is a very, very poor night of seeing. I think even naked eye I can watch the stars bounce around, and it's really pretty horrible. Even here we can actually see from frame to frame there's a good amount of noise. You can watch the star changing its shape, you can watch it moving around. PhD is going right now. PhD is going just fine. But as I adjust the focus here, I'm going to see if I can tune in a little bit better. There I'd hit the focus motor, and I'm trying to see now, can I actually get my focus a little bit better on this target? If you missed the previous version, the previous episode of the tutorial here. What we're seeing here is the star's profile. We also have continuous readouts of the maximum image intensity, the average of the top 3 pixels. On the bottom, there's a nice running history, so we get to actually see how our current focus is by all of these 3 metrics relative to what we've actually had previously. I've now gone past, you can clearly see all of my focus metrics have gone down, and I've got a reverse direction on my telescope's focuser to try to actually get this to come back in. It's a little bit better than I had it originally, not astoundingly, not hugely better, but we'll see if we can fine-tune the focus in a little bit better here. So this is the maximum, this is the peak I'm going for. I know I should be able to get back up somewhere around there before I actually call myself done. That's decidedly worse here. Problem with some of the electric focusers, I've got an inexpensive one here on my scope. It works very, very well, except when I reverse directions, sometimes I realize that it automatically overshoots. So here I'm coming back the other side of focus, and I'm trying to see if I can actually fine-tune things in. Typically this actually only takes me 30 seconds to a minute. Seeing tonight is quite poor, and it's making it a little more difficult to actually know when I'm actually really locked into a good bit of focus. Of course, here I seem to have gone past it again. This is something that does just take a little bit of time sometimes. Once we think that we do have a nice focus here, we can now go on and we can worry about things like actually capturing a series. So let's say that we're done here. This is pretty good. We hit that same maximum level we hit before. I think that's about as good as it's going to get. So I'd hit the abort button. And we can now go on and we can decide what kind of exposure duration we're actually going to take, and we can set up to capture a whole nice big long series. Let's come back over, we'll check our guiding. Sure enough, the star is right there, everything is just fine. So let's now take our exposure duration and let's try taking it up to 60 seconds. Now on something like M42 here, if we hit preview, on something like M42 here, quite probably we're actually going to blow out the core. The core is so bright on M42, we're going to blow that out, and we're actually going to, though we'll be able to get the faint wispy bits. A lot of people think that, well, M42 is going to be a very nice easy target. It's a wonderful target. You can see it naked eye even on a very dark night in a very nice dark sky. Well, it's true, that brightness is a little bit of a double-edged sword, of course. It's so bright that our CCD detectors can't actually get the very, very faint wispy bits while still actually having enough intensity range, enough full well capacity to be able to actually get the core as well. So you often end up actually taking exposures of multiple different durations. Let's see how this actually does here. Certainly a good idea before you decide to say, well, give me 3 hours worth of exposures here at 1 minute apiece, to see what you're actually going to get in each one of them. So our exposure is finishing up now, says it's downloading. We'll show the image, and here's the image. Sure enough, the core is decidedly blown out, but we are seeing some nice faint wispy bits around the outside edges as well. So we could decide to keep this if we want to get a series that's actually at this. We could decide that, well, we really do want to be able to see the trapezium, and we want to be able to have something a little bit less in the intensity range there, and really be able to get this core and show some details inside there. So for right now, also for demonstration purposes, so you don't have to hear me talking for minutes upon minutes upon minutes here, let's set this up to take a series that's going to be a little bit shorter. So I'm going to go over to the duration. I'm going to set my duration over here to be 10 seconds. I'm going to take a preview here and just see sort of what we're actually going to be able to get in 10 seconds and make sure that it really is going to really maintain the central core of M42 without blowing it out. Exposure's done, pops up, and there it is. We now see what probably most of you have seen by now, the core of M42. Hover over the directory button, it tells you where you're currently going to save it. If you press the directory button, what it'll do is it'll come up with a dialog that lets you select what directory to save it in, or click on Make New Folder here. Creates a new folder. You can now name this whatever you like. I tend to like naming it with the date and the object that I'm hitting. So I'll enter in today's date here, and I can also enter in something about the object that I'm actually shooting. So this way later on I'll know actually what this really is. Click OK. That's where it's going to save it. We hover over there, and now it shows that. Let's give it a name here. I tend to like putting the object name again, and also something, for example, about the exposure duration. This is the 10-second series. If I were doing this for real, I would take multiple different exposure durations to try to get all of M42 in here. Guiding is still working just fine. Now we can go over, we can say, let's not just do one exposure, we want a whole series of these things. So let's say we're going to take 10 exposures. So at this point, if I hit capture series, I'm going to get a whole series of exposures. So let's take a look at this little window that popped up here. If you have in your preferences the enable big status display, this little dialog will pop up. On the bottom it's showing the progress during the current exposure, this one just finished, and on the top it's showing the progress throughout the entire series. So this way we get to have a nice, easy to see kind of way of keeping track of exactly where we are. So you'll get to know when should I come on over and move the telescope to the next target, set up for an exposure duration, a different filter, whatever. Or if you're really tired and about to try to head home, pack things up for the night. Okay, I am getting very close to the end of a 5-minute long exposure. Or geez, I just started one of these. Okay, fine, let's wait it out, or let's abort here. So that's a very nice feature that can let you actually keep track of that. Also, of course, at the end of this series, it'll play a little bit of a chime if you have that preference selected to let you know that everything is done, and if you're not staring straight at the telescope the entire time. I know I don't stare at the computer screen as it captures for 3-4 hours, etc. Each time you're also getting to see exactly what each new shot looks like. Now let's talk about guiding here a little bit. Right now these are very short exposures. They don't really need to be guided. We can at any time look over to PhD and see that yes, in fact, it's still sitting here on the star. The star in the green box is still nicely centered on the crosshairs. It says it's guiding in the lower left, showing us our corrections that are being made there in the status bar. If guiding does go off, the whole display is going to flash. If it thinks that it's lost the star, it'll flash red again so that you can potentially see this from afar and actually know that something has come up that actually needs your attention. Now sometimes actually when you're guiding, you're taking longer exposures, you may see star trails. You may see stars that aren't perfectly round in your images. Now, first recourse, of course, is to think that something has majorly gone wrong. Another thing, we'll talk about flex and what that can actually be doing and why that may be more important actually than adjusting the parameters in PhD. You can see here our series is just about done. When it's done and downloaded, we'll hear the chime.